After finishing the Dune novel by Frank Herbert, I decided to go back and rewatch the corresponding movies, and it was great. Going in with that extra connection to the story helped my experience so much, adding that extra layer of depth that just works perfectly for massive fantasy stories like this one. But I also found myself not just fascinated with them as adaptations, but also as movies. The way these films was done is just perfect, from the directing to the acting to the shots, but most importantly, to the color. For a film like this, nailing the color is important, and it's safe to say they delivered. Every minute detail in the coloring and grading here feels like it was done on purpose, and it worked. And there's maybe no scene that highlights this more than the beautifully directed sequence on GIEDI Prime, or as normal people know it, the black and white planet. The severe use of dark blacks and bright whites emphasizes the unsettling nature of this culture. I mean, this is a planet that has been cut from nature and uses totalitarian methods of keeping the peace. With a planet like Arrakis, you can just look at the color scheme and it gives the audience clues about the Fremen, and we'll get into that later. But for GIEDI Prime, the director wanted to reflect the Harkonnen way of life. This is a society with countless slaves, barbaric sports, and has been cut off from any nature, sort of acting as an opposite to Arrakis in the Fremen way of life. And this effect was achieved through the use of infrared cameras. Now, if this scene was truly monochromatic, it would have looked something like this, which, don't get me wrong, would still do leagues for conveying the message it was going for. But instead they opted to use the severe ends of the color spectrum. This results in a great contrast in colors, and not as many grays as you'd usually see in a quote-unquote true monochromatic segment. This color scheme, at least in my opinion, works so well for conveying the totalitarian and fascist nature of the government. It shows how unnatural this planet is. By subtracting the color from their world, the director is able to convey that artificial atmosphere of GIEDI Prime. A great example of this is that artificial aura that you get from the black sun, which was really just an excuse for the director to have this be in black and white. But instead of using that as some random device to achieve the color scheme he wanted, he builds on it and uses it to project the emotions of the civilians. It adds that uncanny feeling that is being built up throughout this segment by showing something that just isn't natural and doesn't feel right. It's amazing how the director doesn't need to say anything, but the audience can just tell how otherworldly this planet is just through the color alone. The sheer skill and effort that goes into a sequence like this could honestly be a video of its own, but that's not even the start of it. There are so many scenes in the Dune movies that use color perfectly, but we'll get into some more later. Because in order to truly enjoy the rest of these analyses, we'll have to look at the man behind it all, and you may recognize his style from his other work. It's none other than Denis Villeneuve. Villeneuve is famous for his amazing use of color on some of his other works like Blade Runner 2049 and Sicario. He's built up a reputation for how he uses his color to invoke emotion, using it as an extension of the character's feelings. For instance, this shot in Blade Runner 2049, which employs more muted, cool colors to invoke a sense of uncertainty. Not only does it just, well, look good, it also has a double meaning which tells the audience everything they need to know. It's just like GIEDI Prime, but I will admit to a slightly lesser extent. And if you think his use of cool colors is fantastic, just wait until you see how he uses warm colors. While his cool colors create a foreboding, ominous sense, his warm palette does the opposite, giving us a level of clearness and elation that is unmatched in all of cinema. This is because of just how visually strikingly he uses them, typically in contrast with cool backgrounds to add to the remarkably warm colors. And the way he utilizes every single color in his film to strike our feelings is just stellar. I mean, take literally any shot out of a movie like Blade Runner and tell me if it does not use colors perfectly. When you can somehow revolutionize a color palette as, well, black and white as black and white, you know you've made it. Villeneuve also takes a lot of inspiration from other mediums of art apart from film, like paintings, contemporary art, and obviously books. This really gives some extra insight onto the opinion that every frame of a Villeneuve movie can be framed. Using all these extra methods really helps with how he shoots his movies and gives him more understanding on what would look good. And I'm sure this helps a ton with deciding him where to position props and actors for the best effect. And some of this every frame is a painting mentality really bleeds through in movies like Dune Part 2. which have had multiple video analyses going over it. And sure, some of the color choices in this movie can be chalked up to some lore reason, like Melange making the spice orange or the black sun on GIEDI Prime. But let's be honest, most of these are just because, to put it simply, Villeneuve is an artist, and part of being an artist is using color to convey a point. A great example of color being used in Dune is another scene that also left audiences speechless by the end of it. The Sandworm riding scene. This scene, while maybe not being as colorfully unique as GIEDI Prime, it's just as interesting in its use of visual storytelling. It applies contrast between the darker and lighter tones of the desert to show Paul's danger and then triumph. Let's rewind a bit actually. We start out with Paul on a sand dune, ready to take on a worm. In this frame, the contrast of Paul's dark silhouette on the light sand dune creates a sense of insecurity, highlighting the danger to come. As Paul walks back up the sand dune, the contrast is again used perfectly to underline the impending uncertainty of the events to follow. Villeneuve uses this effect throughout the entire sequence of events, really hammering that unknown sense home. I mean, we know Paul won't die here, but this constant contrast in color makes us genuinely question his safety here. Even though this is just the first major plot point of the movie, we're still afraid for Paul's safety, and this uneasiness works so well for this sequence. This effect is then furthered as the sandworm approaches, unearthing the darker sand as it rapidly approaches Paul. Then, the worm goes through the dune, creating a dark pit in the sand, which again adds to that level of uneasiness. Paul jumps in, embracing the danger, and this is where the contrast is really noticeable. Everything is a sort of dark brown/golden color. It's the sand that's underground. Then for a moment, as Paul triumphs and starts to get the hang of it, we go back into the light, but almost immediately go back down as Paul starts to struggle more. I mean, this is such a rich scene. Paul's struggle with this sandworm is reflected in the coloring, where you go from the deep muted colors of the underground sand to the bright light colors of the sand on the surface. This is visual storytelling at its finest. And the editing also does wonders here. It's purposely arranged in a confusing way. Well, I suppose confusing isn't the right word. It's more like complex. It uses the editing to hold back certain information and then reveal it at the perfect time. And again, it does this by utilizing the constant up and down movements of the worm. It quite literally keeps the audience in the dark, only to show how Paul's doing as we return to the light. Throughout this entire segment, we are on the same page as Paul, seeing what he sees, finding out stuff as he does. We are literally struggling with Paul. The scene just works so well. It perfectly uses the color of ARRAKIS and all their different shades to convey this message. Speaking of, it's about time I actually get to the color of Dune. And I know what you may be thinking, isn't that what this entire video has been about? And well, yes. But I'm not talking about the movie series. I mean the literal colors used on Dune, the planet. And this is probably the topic I've been the most excited to cover. There is just so much to talk about on this one planet. And I know GIEDI Prime gets hyped up a lot as being the best looking planet in Dune, but in my opinion, it's easily Arrakis. While at first it seems to only have the same tan color palette, it actually tends to use a lot more colors than this. From the orange tint of the deep desert to the dark blue of the nights on Dune, this planet actually applies a lot more color than you'd think. And the colors aren't just there to be pretty. I mean, come on, this is Villeneuve we're talking about. The dark shades of blue during the night accentuate the guise of safety, veiling them from the harsh desert sun, whereas the bright oranges and tans represent the opposite, the jarring danger of the planet during the day. It's just beautiful the way this planet uses color to accent the harsh conditions of a desert. The use of complementary colors on this planet between night and day is amazing. How it's able to convey completely different messages by just the tint of the screen is beyond me. And I constantly found myself awestruck by the use of coloring in this planet. What originally inspired me to make this video was watching a raccoon get attacked. Up until that point, the planet had mostly been seen during the day, and seeing this new color scheme gave it an all-new feeling, just like how a desert works in real life. I mean, it's just beautiful that these movies are able to make a desert not look bland. Deserts, at least for the most part, are all one color, and the fact that Villeneuve is able to stretch out the muted colors of a wasteland to the incredibly wide spectrum of colors is amazing. It's got blues, golds, oranges, anything you could ask for. And then think about how easy it would be for them to just use the same dull tan color for these movies. The amount of effort that has to be put in for this desired effect is just monumental. And then the sandworms, I mean, those feel like real things. And the colors work so well for every aspect of them. First off, it's got that realism factor. You could see sandworms being this color from how long they've spent in the sand. Second off, the visible darkness in their mouth just conveys a sense of danger in the unknown. Just the comparison that this brings to, say, an abyss works on so many levels. Oh, and that's not even to mention the Fremen. Just like how the Harkonnen way of life is translated through their planet, Arrakis equally conveys its people through its coloring and style choices. Just like the desert, the Fremen can be both tranquil and cruel, reflecting the harsh environment they've been born into. I just love the way Villeneuve was able to mirror the desert in the Fremen's clothes, culture, and ruthlessness. And I'm guessing in Dune Messiah, we'll see a shift in the Fremen just like the desert shifts during the night, becoming more fanatic under the rule of Paul. And on the topic of Dune Messiah, I truly do hope that this movie will live up to the first and second installments, being able to use brand new vibrant colors and palettes on the new planets introduced in that story. If this movie adds on to the color as much as Dune Part 2 did, it could be one of the best looking movies ever made. And with all that said, it's time for me to start wrapping things up. Be sure to subscribe because this is a relatively new channel and I'd love to be able to make more videos like this in the future. But if you are still considering whether you want to subscribe, maybe check out my previous video on the finale of Whiplash, which should be on the screen now. And again, thank you for watching this far, and I really do appreciate all the positive feedback on my prior videos.